Yeah, welcome to our next session of the Presenting the Path, Module 3 of the Discovering Buddhism program. So we'll begin in the usual way. Mary Ellen, could you enable screen sharing for me, please? One second. So first, we'll just start in the usual way with the taking refuge in generating bodhicitta, and this special formulation of this verse with this phrase, listening to the Dharma, replacing what we normally say. By my merits of generosity and so forth. So here, I just thought to mention before we do, a question came up, could we just give a brief commentary on this verse? So I do think it's important that we all know a little bit about what we're saying when we say these prayers. So basically, right, we'll get into all of this more in depth in the coming weeks and months. But basically, this concept of taking refuge is a very central theme within Buddhism. And actually, what distinguishes someone as a Buddhist or non-Buddhist is whether they have taken refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or not. And so this concept of refuge, even to think in a worldly sense, actually here, last night there was unbelievable torrential downpour, the biggest I've ever seen here since I've come to Seta. Actually, a tree fell down that knocked out the power lines. Anyway, but when there's a big rainstorm, right, one doesn't want to get wet, and so one goes, under shelter, and that's, in a worldly sense, we say taking refuge. So the concept here is the same, right? We see something sort of undesirable that we don't want to experience, and then just as when it starts to rain, we look for a place that can protect us from the elements. So too, when we look around, we want to find something that can protect us from what we don't want to experience. And so actually, later we're going to get into these three types of practitioner, right? Or the three scopes. That's the kind of central theme of the Lamrim, but also of this module. And so each of those three practitioners or three types of person have their own individual kind of thing that they're seeking protection from. So the person of the small scope seeks protection from the lower realms. Person in the medium scope seeks, protection from all of samsara, and the person of the great scope, seeks, basically protection from not being enlightened or not being a fully enlightened Buddha. And so when one sees this thing that's undesirable, they then, look for something that can help, protect them from that. And for each of those three, then the Buddha Dharma, here in this stanza, it says Supreme Assembly. That means the Sangha, which means the kind of community of spiritual practitioners. In that way, since they include, these great Arya beings and so forth, then among assemblies, they are supreme. So then the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha have the ability, to protect one from all of those three levels of undesirable things. And so then we take refuge in them, right? So just like when we see a good, strong structure, right? Then it's not just that, you know, we remain out in the rain and say, oh, may not get wet, but we actually have to go, you know, go under the you know, protective roof or whatever, right? So that's why, you know, we say, actually here, you might see, I go for refuge, right? So it implies a kind of you know, action on our part. But what this means is, you know, to kind of commit ourselves to the path laid out by the Buddha, which is, you know, the Dharma itself, and then to also take the guidance of the Sangha community, who are, generally speaking, are practitioners with more experience than ourselves, and so they also, you know, are suitable to, you know, be relied upon for guidance. So that's the first two lines here, right? What refuge is, and then what the objects of refuge are, why we take refuge, and then to say, you know, not just um, like, I'll take refuge under this shelter until the rain stops, and then I'll go on my way. Here, you know, we say I take refuge till I'm enlightened. So, you know, actually, yeah, not just the kind of passing fad or something, but you know, until I'm enlightened, I'm going to commit myself to this path. And then the next two verses, or sorry, next two lines are the lines basically that show bodhicitta, right? So here we motivate our practice, our merits. So as I mentioned, normally we say generosity and so forth. When we say generosity and so forth, that's the so-called six perfections: um, generosity, ethical discipline, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, meditation, and wisdom, right? But here, we're before teaching, we normally say listening to the Dharma. So yeah, by listening to the Dharma with a good motivation, we can, you know, also collect extraordinary amounts of merit. So by all of these merits, right, then we sort of motivate and dedicate that we become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. So this thought to become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings is, you know, in short, what this mind of bodhicitta is. So bodhi is enlightenment, chitta is mind. So it's basically a mind wishing to attain enlightenment. Okay, so yeah, that is why we do this at the beginning of the teaching sessions, and you'll see a similar type of formulation at the beginning of many kinds of practices and you know, sadhanas and so forth. I had heard that this refuge formula was also written by Atisha. So anyway, just a bit of knowledge for you. Okay, so with that, then we can recite. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Okay. And so now, let's continue. So I mentioned last week that I wanted to do this as well, just like Pabonka Rinpoche does in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. He usually, you know, if you notice every day, he'll start with a small quotation and use that to further kind of bolster the motivation of the people who are attending the teachings. So I thought I could also do that. So anyway, this is maybe a stanza and a half by the great Indian master Arya Sura. So he says, human life plants the seed for going beyond psychic existence, the supreme seed of glorious enlightenment. Human life is a stream of good qualities, better than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Who here would attain it and then waste it? So we've already mentioned the fact that everyone here on this call, everyone who is listening and maybe watching this teaching in the future, we all have this very precious human rebirth, and we say that it is precious because with it we can basically attain anything we want in the future, right? And so here, this thought of cause and effect is so central to the Buddha's teachings, that if we want to attain a certain kind of goal, then we have to accumulate the causes for it. And so here now, the other analogy that is often used is this, of farmers and seeds, right? So this is, even in kind of a more worldly context, there's the fable of the farmers who don't do anything in the summer, and then when it comes time for harvest in the fall, they don't have anything to then take them through the winter. Whereas the ones who diligently work in the summer, they have the big harvest in the autumn that then helps them survive through the winter. So similarly, now with our human life, if we are intelligent and diligent, we can plant the seed, means create the cause for going beyond psychic existence. So going beyond psychic existence means the utter pacification and eradication of all the various sufferings that we experience. And then not only that, then the supreme seed of glorious enlightenment. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but actually, those two goals, the mere liberation from samsara and the fully enlightened, glorious enlightenment, they're actually two different goals. And with this human life, we can, not just get liberation, mere liberation from samsara, but the state of complete enlightenment. And therefore, because of that, right, then this human life is a stream of good qualities, better than a wish-fulfilling jewel. So the wish-fulfilling jewel, is another thing you'll see many times in the Indo-Tibetan literature. As we mentioned before, it's kind of like Aladdin's lamp or something, right? Where you can, if you obtain one of these wish-fulfilling jewels, it is said that you can then wish for and receive anything material that you want. So, whatever, money, cars, the new iPhone, whatever it is, right? You can attain that with a wish-fulfilling jewel. So, this is likened in the kind of literature as something being the most precious of all material possessions. But what is important to note, and why then they say that the human life is more precious even than that, is although we might get a wish-fulfilling jewel, well, we can get all the material things, but these kinds of goals that we have, they're big goals that extend beyond the mere kind of attainment of this life, right? We want a good future rebirth. We want liberation. We want enlightenment. And so since the wish-fulfilling jewel, all it can grant us are the kind of material comforts of this life, but actually can do very little, if anything, to help us attain, something in future lives, then this human life is, far better than a wish-fulfilling jewel. So now that we have attained this human life, then we cannot waste it. We should not waste it. So yeah, like that. So then, the best thing that we can do with our lives is then, to make utmost progress along the path to this glorious enlightenment, this state of completely developing all of our good qualities and abandoning all the faults of the mind, so that we can be of utmost benefit to sentient beings. And therefore, in order to achieve the state of enlightenment, we need to learn about all these practices that lead to enlightenment. And therefore, we take part in classes like this. Then we, listen well, we do our study, we do our practice, and we live our lives with this goal in mind. Okay, nice. All right. So now, these outlines, right? So I call these the root outlines. These are the four main outlines at the beginning of, yes, liberation in the palm of your hand, but also Lamrim Chenmo, the other kinds of Lamrim texts. So we were going through these four, and first, the greatness of the authors, given to show the teaching has an immaculate source. So this we've basically covered. And in last week's reading, it went into more detail about Atisha's biography. So yeah, I don't want to spend more time on that right now. Then we have the greatness of the Dharma, given to increase one's respect for the instruction. Then how to teach and listen to the Dharma that has these two greatnesses, and then the actual sequence in which the disciples are taught the actual instructions. So last week we spent a lot of time, maybe too much time, on the second point about the greatness of the Dharma given to increase one's respect for the instruction. And then we were spending a lot of time actually on this first point, the greatness of allowing you to realize that all teachings are without contradiction. So we delved in a bit into what this apparent contradiction could be, and then talking about how the Dharma, or particularly these Lamrim teachings, help us to realize that these teachings are without contradiction. So last week, then we were talking especially when we think about, okay, what could appear to be contradictory, we were focusing more on this concept of the two truths, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth, right? And then just to review, we're saying that the conventional truth is the sort of normal things taken on and believed in by the world, right? So tables, chairs, you, me, everything that sort of exists. And if we're not if we're satisfied without asking too many questions, right, then we're saying we can get by in the world totally fine. We can ask people to bring us things. We can make appointments. We can get around and function totally perfectly in the world. But then we were saying the ultimate level of truth then is when we're not satisfied with the kind of mere way that things appear, and we try to delve a bit deeper, thinking about how actually these phenomena exist. Do they exist independent of our minds? Do they exist independent of other factors and phenomena? Are they objectively existent, inherently existent? Are they just subjectively existent? Do they exist separate from the mind? Anyway, all these kinds of questions. So here, right, when the Buddha then taught, see, these two levels of truth then become very important. And you see, even the Dalai Lama talks about this. When we are analyzing the teachings and we ever come to a part where we feel that the conventional truth, right? So you, me, tables, cars, and so forth, all these things that we see in the world, if we get to a point where we're at risk of then falling into nihilism, right? And saying, oh, these things don't exist at all, right? Between these two of grasping on to, a nihilistic view that nothing exists, and grasping on to what we call a eternalistic view that things exist in and of themselves, independently, truly, inherently, then it's better to fall into that eternalism view, right? Because, as we were saying, this central concept of a person that sort of exists, life to life, and will experience the fruits of actions done, that is of central importance to all the various Buddhist schools. And all of them then have to come up with a way that makes sense, a sense of a personal identity that will go on from life to life. And so, since there are certain people, certain tenet systems that have a lot of difficulty thinking that there could be a kind of conventionally existent person, if that person doesn't, truly or inherently, ultimately exist, then the Buddha taught these different levels of sort of philosophical sophistication. And for some, as he taught that actually the self truly exists, the self inherently exists, okay? Later, then the Buddha would teach, no, the self doesn't truly exist, inherently exist, but as a kind of temporary way of leading disciples gradually, he taught the true existence of the self, right? So anyway, that's the apparent contradiction on a kind of ultimate level. But what we didn't mention, and yeah, it's also true, smaller things also can appear to be contradictory, right? So we have, on the one hand, this thought, we have to abandon the eight worldly concerns. And in the eight worldly concerns, there's the getting attachment to gain, right? And aversion to loss, right? So we have this thought, okay, we need to abandon the worldly concern, wanting gain. But then later, when we see in the six perfections, all this thought about the benefits of generosity, and the benefits of generosity that will attain, wealth and resources in our next life, right? So even this could be seen as, okay, well, here, Buddha, you say I have to, be free of attachment from wealth, and then later you're praising generosity because we'll attain wealth in the future, So even things like this, it could appear to be contradictory, but here, the Dharma teachings, enable us to see that actually is, without contradiction. So the point being here in this example of wealth, it's not the wealth in itself that is, bad or undesirable, but rather our attachment to it. And, since everything depends on the motivation, in the kind of initial teachings on the overcoming the eight worldly concerns, it's talking about a kind of initial practitioner whose thought to achieve wealth is only extending to the benefits it can bring us in this very life, having comfort and experiencing nice experiences, right? Experiencing nice experiences, having nice experiences just in this life. But later in the when we talk about the six perfections, for a bodhisattva, they see the great good they can do in the world if they have material resources, right? And so their motivation for attaining wealth isn't just so they can, have nice stuff or a new car or whatever, but rather they see, wealth as a means to an end to benefit sentient beings, and therefore even those kinds of teachings are, without contradiction. Okay. So now, I wanted to just maybe go through these quickly, because these were covered in the reading you've done, and we actually have a lot of material to go through. So just to then run through the rest of these, then the greatness of allowing that all the scriptures present themselves to you as instructions, right? So then, the point is here, even these seemingly, very deep philosophical teachings, right? There's a risk that we see them as, something over here, just as a kind of intellectual exercise, but we can kind of miss the overall point of, why they were taught in the first place, right? And so, all of these instructions are means by which we are to subdue the mind. And so even something, I did another course about karma and purification, and actually Shanti was in that course. And then there's this question that comes up in the philosophical text about, okay, when we talk about karmic imprints, what that actually is, right? And then there's a whole, huge debates about where those karmic imprints are stored, in the person. And anyway, those of you who have studied more, then, in the mind-only school, they posit these like 8 types of consciousnesses, and there's this, mind basis of all, and the imprints are stored on that. And then, anyway, there's all this kind of philosophical debate about those points. But overall, right, remember this central theme that all the Buddhist tenets have to keep in mind and have is this thought of a person that goes on from life to life that's going to experience the effects, positive or negative, of the actions that we do. Okay, so then that is the goal, and all those tenet systems are trying to come up with an underlying philosophy where that will make sense. But for us, right, the practice is, right, to abandon negativity and accomplish as much virtue as possible, right? So whether those virtues are then, imprints that are then stored on the 8th consciousness, or the 6th consciousness, or all these other things, the actual instruction is to, as we saw in the Dhammapada, do not commit a single negative action, accumulate a host of virtuous actions, right? So then seeing, in the Lam Rim, how these different kinds of goals are all sort of, I should say like this, all the different philosophical tenet systems are means by which practitioners can do the practices to attain those various goals, right? Then we can see all of these scriptures themselves as instructions. Then third, the greatness of allowing you to easily discover the true thinking of the victorious one. Okay, so true thinking of the victorious one. So again, this gets into the concept of certain teachings that are not able to be taken in a definitive manner, but rather we say are, gompa chen gido, as we say. So it's like a sutra that has a kind of ulterior intention, right? So, for example, even when the Buddha describes the true existence of the person or true existence of other phenomena, right? The kind of intention behind that is, that it's given for people who can't posit the conventional existence of a person without it being truly existent. But the real kind of thought behind that is that the person actually isn't truly existent, but temporarily to guide this person so they can, start to accumulate virtue and purify their minds and so forth. Then the Buddha, teaches in this other way, right? So then, the Lamrim allows us to see that. Then the greatness of allowing you to save yourself from the worst misdeed. So here the worst misdeed would be to, thinking, for example, that these, the teachings actually have contradiction in them. And then to say, oh, well, these things, I don't need to practice that. I don't need to, study that, like this. So that they say is the misdeed of abandoning the Dharma. And so the point is, and maybe some of us think like this, oh, well, if I'm, an aspiring Mahayana practitioner anyway, well, why do I need to, mess around with these, the person of a small capacity and middle capacity? Just give me the good stuff, right? don't give me the, preliminary kind of teachings. But the point is, right, there's this quotation, I'm not sure if you remember, but in the teachings, Bobon Rinpoche quotes Maitreya in the Ornament of Clear Realization, who says, those who would work for the sake of beings should benefit the world by knowing the paths. Okay, so that line is actually taken from the verse of homage from the Abhisamaya Alamkara, the Ornament of Clear Realization, written by Maitreya. We'll get into that text in a little bit, but what that means is, right, those who would work for the sake of beings means, Mahayana practitioners, bodhisattvas, right? Well, bodhisattvas and Buddhas, right? So then should benefit the world by knowing the paths, okay? So this means, they benefit beings by knowing all the various paths, means practices that others might engage in, right? So even the bodhisattva practitioners, they know very well the paths of practice for a person of small capacity, for a person of middle capacity, and then they teach those practices to the various people, right? So in order to teach those to others, then they have to be fully proficient in them themselves. So actually, Shantideva says something that there's nothing that a bodhisattva does not learn, okay? Because, since bodhisattvas are, trying to benefit sentient beings, and sentient beings have, various interests, then in order that we can be beneficial to them, we have to learn what they want to know about so we can teach it to them, okay? So therefore, to say otherwise and say, oh, I don't need to learn about these practices, is a very grave misdeed. And then the Lamrim enables us to, prevent ourselves from thinking like that. Then these point 5, the Lamrim is complete because it contains all the subject matter of Sutra and Tantra. So here again, there are these two kind of systems of practice. They call it the Sutrayana and the Tantra or Vajrayana. And basically, for now, it's important to note that, when we talk about bodhicitta, when we talk about emptiness, okay, those are the sort of the common paths between the Sutra and Tantra systems. And even the view of emptiness, the view of ultimate reality, is the same in both Sutra and Tantra. The only thing that is different is the kind of subtlety of the mind which meditates on emptiness, not the view of emptiness themselves. Lamrim, as it says in the Foundation of All Good Qualities, By the way, how has the memorization been going? But anyway, in that it says, once I've become a pure vessel by training in the general path, please and bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate, the supreme Vajra vehicle, right? So here, the general path we can think of as these three paths, or the three types of being in the Lamrim, right? So we can either think of it as the trainings of the small, middle, and great scope, or we can think of it in terms of the three principles of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and the view of emptiness. So those are the very kind of heart of the path, and those three are also needed, in of course the Sutrayana, but also the Vajrayana, the Tantra. So yeah, without it, actually, then even the very profound practices of Tantra, then they won't bear fruit. They won't become the cause for liberation and enlightenment if we don't have those three principles very firmly sort of integrated and realized. Okay, then 6. It is easy to put into practice because it emphasizes the steps for taming the mind. Okay, yeah. So here, I think the point is, the steps for taming the mind means, it presents them in order, right? It presents them in order. And yeah, therefore it's easy because we sort of know, what to do at what time, right? When we look at other texts, they have a quite different order in which things are, presented, and therefore it can be a little bit difficult after we read all these things. It's like, okay, well, now what do I do? Okay. Then last point here, it is superior to the other traditions because it contains instructions from 2 gurus who were schooled in the traditions of the 2 great champions. Okay, so now what does this mean? All right, so this actually, this phrase, there's a lot of meaning to unpack, right? Unpack, okay? So here, I just thought to mention it because these come up again and again. But we had said that all these teachings within the Lamrim, it wasn't made up by Lama Tsongkhapa, it wasn't made up by Atisha, but actually all these instructions came down from Buddha himself. And so when the Buddha taught, then at different teachings there were different audience members, and so different instructions were passed on to different disciples. Those disciples in turn then had their own disciples, and so forth. So then when they talk about these practice instructions, then there are these different lineages, right? Or we can say, yeah, lineage, right? A stream of kind of practice instructions that came down. So the first we can say is the profound view lineage. And this went from the Buddha to Manjushri to Narghajuna. And this taught the explicit subject matter of the perfection of wisdom sutras, that is emptiness, okay? Or we can say the wisdom side of the path, okay? So you'll hear this often, right? There's the wisdom side and the method side, okay? Then we have the extensive deeds lineage, and this taught the hidden meaning of the perfection of wisdom sutras and taught the extensive deeds or method side of the path, okay? So the method side of the path, right, is bodhicitta, and then the other practices besides, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So that, the practice of ethical discipline, generosity, patience, these things, they're all on the method side of the path, okay? And then furthermore, how one then progresses along the various practices. So it also talks about, the five paths. Some of you might have heard of path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, right? The 10 bhumis, or the 10 grounds of a bodhisattva. All these kinds of things are discussed in the extensive deeds lineage. And just 2 minutes ago, I mentioned this text, the Ornament of Clear Realization by Maitreya, right? So you see here the extensive deeds lineage, where the instructions passed from the Buddha to Maitreya to Asanga. So this text, the Ornament of Clear Realization, actually shows the hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Okay. And then you also see the Great Blessings lineage. So that was from Buddha to Manjushri to Shantideva. And in that, okay, the main unique kind of teaching that was given was the teaching on the equalizing and exchanging self for others, or the Tonglen. Okay. Later we'll see, right, there's two ways that this mind of bodhicitta are developed, is developed. One is the so-called 7-point cause and effect instructions, and then this equalizing, exchanging self for others. So the 7-point cause and effect instructions was the one passed down, through Maitreya to Asanga, and then the equalizing, exchanging self for others was then passed down through Shantideva. Okay. So now, each of these two lineages have their respective charioteer, or great champion. Sometimes you also see it as a trailblazer. In the Tibetan, the word is Shingta Solche. So Shingta is chariot, and then Solche, it kind of means, to open the path, right? So the point is, right, I guess in the old days, if you were trying to go somewhere, right, a chariot needs a nice kind of road. So the people before they make the road, they have to clear away the weeds and make something nice. So anyway, that's what this means with these two lineages have their respective, and then they call it charioteer, great champion, trailblazer, something like this. Okay, so those two are Narghajuna and Asanga. Okay, so if you know a bit, right? So they both came, Narghajuna and Asanga came, centuries after the Buddha appeared, right? So the thought is, yes, the Buddha did teach these profound view lineage, the extensive deeds lineage, but teachings found in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were sort of lost and not widely practiced. And so it is, as it were, if the kind of the trail had become overgrown again. And so these two, Narghajuna and Asanga, then sort of wrote in their commentaries the way then to kind of reinvigorate and reestablish those lineages, those instructions, and therefore they're known as the kind of trailblazers of those two lineages. And then in the outlines it says because it contains hold on. It contains instructions from two gurus who were schooled in the traditions of the two great champions, right? So those two gurus then are Vidya Kokila, and he was a guru who held the instructions from the profound view lineage, and then Suvarna Vipi. Well, the Tibetans say Sir Lingpa, right? So as you know, this was the guru that Atisha took the bodhicitta teachings from in in Indonesia. Okay, so the point is, and I'm pretty sure that Atisha took the teachings directly from Vidya Kokila, right? So Atisha then is the one who then took back both of these lineages, and also from Sir Lingpa, he also got the Great Blessings lineage that had the equalizing and exchanging self for others practices, right? So then, Atisha then, there are these kind of scattered lineages, right? And then Atisha brought them back together, and then transmitted them all, to his disciples in Tibet. And then, as it says, right, the Kadampa teachings then again went through a little bit of forking, right? There were the Lamrim lineage, extensive treatise lineage, and the Mengak, the perceptual instructions lineage, pith instructions lineage. And then Lama Tsongkhapa brought all of those various lineages again back together, and then they've been all transmitted together until the present day. So anyway, the point is, these teachings now found in Lamrim, they have all these different instructions that were passed down, and then they kind of came back together, and now are all contained within Lamrim. Okay. All right. So now, see, look, right? Then we're back. That was the greatness of the Dharma, point 2. And then that point 3, how to teach and listen to the Dharma, we actually covered that in a previous session. Okay. And that was the abandoning the faults of the vessel, and the 6 attitudes. And then, of course, when you teach, because later you'll all be teaching, then to keep in mind that you're doing this with a motivation to benefit the listener, not out of kind of worldly concern, wanting to have fame or praise or material reward, things like this. Okay. I think that section in the Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand is pretty well explained, not too many things that need further explanation. So then point 4, the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions. So this then, forms the rest of the Lamrim. And then we have the 2 outlines: the root of the path, devotion to a spiritual guide, and then the proper graduated training you should undertake once you have begun to rely upon your spiritual guide. So this point 1, root of the path, is coming later. It's actually coming in the next module. So please be patient for that. Then here in the point 2, we have the further point 1, the stimulus to take the essence from your optimum human rebirth. Okay, so that actually was the teachings on the precious human rebirth that we covered in module 1. And then I kind of reiterated that point even in the motivation today. We have this, fully qualified rebirth that gives us all the inner and outer conditions to make utmost progress along the path. And therefore, when we think about this great opportunity, we then have to generate that mind. Okay, I'm going to make best use of it. I'm not going to waste it. Okay. So then how we then extract the essence of this optimal human rebirth, then it's to train our minds in any of these stages of the path. Okay. So training your mind in the stages of the path with shared with a small scope, training your mind in the stages of the path shared with a medium scope, and training your mind in the path of the great scope. Okay. All right, so now some more Tibetan lessons. Okay. your first Tibetan lesson, remember, Shing Ta Sol Che. And now, actually, you see these three scopes. In Tibetan, it's actually called the Kebu Sum. Kebu Sum. Sum is three. Kebu, then, three Kebu. Okay. So here, even this has different translations. Okay. So this is a little bit difficult at the beginning when we read kind of different commentaries. All the various translators have their own sort of affinity to different words they use to translate these terms. So I like to emphasize and give a little bit of these bonus Tibetan lessons, so that when we start to read across different texts and different translators and go to different teachings, we can know, okay, they're referring all to the kind of same thing. Okay, so here, kebu sum, right? All right, so etymologically speaking, okay, ke has the meaning of capable, being capable to do things, and bu has a meaning of being. So sometimes you'll see this translated as capable being. So actually, Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself, he prefers this. And sorry, I'm not laughing at Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I'm laughing because I see someone, Mary, your cat was above your head. It's kind of like Narghajuna. You see Narghajuna has a kind of, snakes coming over like this. So your cat was over like that. So anyway, all right. So oftentimes Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he likes to have these to preserve the etymology in some of the things he translates. So the other very common one you'll see, the three rare sublime ones. Okay, you see that for the three jewels. So in the Sanskrit, ratna means jewel literally, but when they translated ratna into Tibetan, there's this kun chok, and kun is rare, and chok is like the best or the supreme. So when we have the kind of parts of the words, the etymology of it, it can give a little bit more meaning, and Rinpoche likes to preserve that. So he gives the quite literal translation of capable being, or rare sublime one. But there's another kind of school of thought amongst translators, where it's like, okay, well, you should actually use words that are kind of common in the target language that you're translating to. So if you were to approach someone on the street and say, oh, are you a capable being, they'll be like, what are you talking about? And similarly, rare sublime one, well, the Sanskrit of ratna, it does just mean jewel, right? And in even in the other traditions, Theravadan tradition and so forth, the kind of phraseology, the three jewels, is quite common. So yeah, anyway, it's a bit of a personal choice with the translators, what they want to emphasize. So you should know all of this. So in the Sanskrit, actually this kebu is purusha. Now, this itself is a huge kind of term, and whether it's in the the Vedas or Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, then even this itself has different meanings. So there is a thought of a kind of universal nature, right? The prakriti, or yeah, and then there's the individual instantiations of that, which is the kind of individual beings. So here, Atisha, he kind of used this word in a little bit of a new way, but for him, for sure, it's just meaning like a being or a person, right? So then there are these three people, right? There's these three kind of practitioners. And then, these three people, they differ in their outlook and motivation for their Dharma practice, okay? And so, in the Lamrim Liberation of Palm Your Hand that we're using, there, the translator used the word scope. And so, that makes sense, right? We say, okay, this is greater in scope, right? It's kind of more broadly viewing, right? It's a great in scope, right? Very vast. Okay. So we have these three different practitioners, and they all have a kind of different scope, right? What they're looking for, what their motivation is, right? From all the way, a modest goal of attaining good rebirth in their future life to gaining liberation from samsara. It's a bit bigger. And then, the sort of greatest scope, the greatest kind of motivation is to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay. So then that's why the translator here, talked about scope. But then in the Lamrim Chenmo, this Lamrim Chenmo translation committee, they're using this terminology, the person of small, medium, and great capacity. So those different motivations, right? They in turn depend on the kind of capacity or those individual practitioners, right? So someone who, of course, to have this thought, I will attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. That takes a lot of courage, maybe a bit of, well, for us, yeah, maybe it's too early for us really to comprehend what that means. But in any case, it takes the most sort of, skill, courage, commitment, and so forth. So those people are the ones of great capacity. Then, to attain liberation from samsara, to have that as a goal, it's less than the full enlightenment, right? So that's medium. And then just to have the thought, okay, I want to get a good rebirth in my next life, then, that is a person of a small capacity, right? So anyway, yeah, you'll see those. And now you have an idea why it's like that, okay? So anyway, as we were saying then, however we, whatever words we use to describe, we then have these, three levels of person, and they're distinguished by their various goals. And then since they have different goals, then they need different methods to attain those goals, okay? So we have the person of the small capacity, their goal, right? To attain a good rebirth in the next life, right? So then to attain any particular goal, you need to accumulate the causes for it, right? And so if the goal is to attain a good rebirth in the next life, then how does one attain it? Well, you have the kind of discordant or the opposite of their goal, which is a rebirth in the lower realms, right? And so then one inquires, okay, what are the causes of getting rebirth in lower realms? All right, that's not virtue. What are the causes of, the goal I want to get a good rebirth? Okay, virtue. So then the method to attain those goals is then to abandon the causes of lower rebirths, non-virtue, and attain, as much virtue as they can. Okay, so then the person of medium capacity, what is their goal? Then their goal is to attain, not just a good rebirth in the next life, but liberation from all of samsaric existence. Okay, so then again, the question comes up, well, what are the causes of samsara? And so the causes are karma and our afflictions. So if we want to be free of samsara, we have to abandon the causes. And so there, then since their goal is liberation from samsara, the method to attain it is abandoning the causes of samsara, karma, and afflictions. Okay. Then the person of great capacity, their goal is to attain, this full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, right? And then how does one attain that? Then, well, one one needs this motivation of bodhicitta, this wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then engaging in the various practices to do that, which we'll get into in a bit. In brief, those are the so-called 6 perfections. Okay, so that is the kind of overview. And now we'll just go one step a little bit further into these 3, and then we'll break up into discussion groups, and then we'll come back for some kind of closing thoughts. Okay, so I wanted to share these. So in Atisha's text, The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, he has laid out in one stanza each for these 3 kebu, these 3 persons of different capacities. So there he says, know to be least those persons who diligently strive to attain solely the joys of Sangha existence by any means for their welfare alone. So, actually it's worth noting that, sometimes you'll see, even the ones who just are thinking about the happiness of this life, right? Technically they are also the people of small capacity, but then we have the kind of, in the Lamrim context, we have the kind of, this minimum bar that we have to prioritize our future lives more than this life. So although the people who are only thinking about this life are also people of small capacity, in the Lamrim context, normally they talk about the people of, or the practitioners of small capacity being as the ones who, are prioritizing the future lives more than this life. Okay, but in any case, when we say the joys of psychic existence, right? Yeah, so then later, right, this is what we're saying, apparent contradiction. Later, we'll come to see that all of psychic existence is like a blazing pit of fire, right? So what are you talking about, joys of psychic existence? So here, as we say, right, it's all relative. So, relative to a rebirth in lower realms, then a rebirth in the higher realm is better, right? Relative to, being poor and sick and all these things, then, being healthy, having, sufficient wealth and so forth is, better than that. So, that is what is meant by joy of cyclic existence. It means, well, better than the alternative within cyclic existence. Okay. So then what are the actual practices that they do? So remember, those teachings on the precious human rebirth, it's actually before the actual practices of a person of small capacity, right? As we saw, in the outlines, right? There is the, stimulus to take the essence from your optimal human rebirth, right? That's precious human rebirth teachings. And then how to extract the essence, point 2 there on the bottom. And then that goes into the 3 scopes, okay? So then in the practices of a person of small capacity, we have the training and the meditation on impermanence and death, okay? So although we have this precious human rebirth, we're going to die. So we're not always going to have this, fortunate circumstance. And then when we die, then since the mind continues, right, we have to then see where the mind could go. And here, it can go either to the lower realms or the upper realms. So again, if we want to motivate to get a good rebirth in our next life, we have to then contemplate and reflect on the alternative, the disadvantages, the suffering of getting rebirth in the lower realms. And, therefore it talks about all the various sufferings we'll experience there. And then the next point is, the refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We talked about this at the beginning of today's class, but here the thought is, yes, there is a lot of suffering in the lower realms, and well, probably given the amount of negative karma that we've accumulated since beginning this rebirth, and the difficulty of attaining a good rebirth in the future, then it is said that well, Shantideva says it's almost certain that we're going to after we depart from this life get reborn in the lower realms. And the Buddha in the Vinaya teachings, he likens he says an analogy that those who go from a lower rebirth to a lower rebirth or a higher rebirth to a lower rebirth is akin to the amount of dust particles of the whole world, or we can think atoms of dirt, versus the amount that go from a lower rebirth to a higher rebirth, or a higher rebirth to a higher rebirth, or the amount of dust particles that can fit on the tip of a finger. Okay. So anyway, then seeing the very kind of dire situation we're in, we then seek a refuge, again, a way to protect us from experiencing that. And that is then the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then the last teaching, or the last kind of section of the person of small capacity, is all these teachings on karma, the law of cause and effect. So even if we generate this mind of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, then if we don't follow their kind of advice and teachings on abandoning negativity and practicing virtue, then there's this analogy that if there's a prisoner, right, then they might receive a pardon from the king, but if after they're released from the jail they go out and continue to commit more crimes, then they're going to wind back in jail very quickly. So similarly, although we might take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and that can offer some protection from suffering, if we don't modify our behavior with the law of cause and effect, then that will be very short-lived as well. So anyway, these are the practices of a person of small capacity. Then we have the attitude of a person of medium capacity. So here, Atisha in the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment says, those persons are called medium, who stop sinful actions, turn their backs on the joys of cyclic existence, and diligently strive just for their own peace. Okay. So later we'll get into this, but there's this terminology of the practices shared with a person of small capacity, practices shared with a person of medium capacity, right? So here you see who stop sinful actions. So this actually is something that the persons of small capacity also do. Okay, so it is important to note that these three type of people, what they actually do, how they behave, it's not contradictory, right? So it's not that the persons of small capacity, they abandon non-virtue, they abandon sinful actions, but now the person of medium capacity, they don't have to worry about that, and it's not like that. So they still engage in those practices, but then they go beyond that, and then turning their backs on the joy of psychic existence, right? So what that means not then to hold, as the person of small capacity did, that these joys of psychic existence is the kind of end all and be all. That's not the motivation, the primary motivation for their practice, right? But instead, they diligently strive for their own peace. Their own peace means this, individual liberation from samsara, for themselves alone. And so that is their goal. And then to, achieve that goal, then there are these practices, right? So the meditating on the faults of samsara, right? To understand all the various, different kind of, sufferings that we experience within samsara. And this again, it's kind of akin, just like in the small person of small capacity, they meditated on the suffering of the lower realms. So here, we not only meditate on the suffering of the lower realms, but more the suffering nature of all of samsara. So even in the so-called higher realm existences, like a human or deva. Okay. And we do that in order that we can generate, excuse me, this mind of renunciation. So here again, Tibetan lesson. That is ne chung in Tibetan, which sometimes you see, literally translated as, definite emergence. Ne being definite, jung means to emerge, right? But what this means, and sometimes I don't like this word renunciation, because what that mind actually is then to set our goal on liberation, right? So, renouncing has this kind of thought like, okay, I don't want that. I don't want that. It's good, but I don't want it, right? It's like, I renounce sugar or, whatever, right? Fried foods, potato chips, something like this, right? We like something, but we renounce. But here, the thought more is, we set our goal that, definitely I must emerge, I must get out of this, total bog of suffering known as samsara, okay? And we can only do that by first, considering in many ways why samsara is actually something very unappealing and, filled with various problems, okay? And so then we also see the Four Noble Truths. The first two, the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering, they're the ones that actually help us to generate this mind of renunciation. And then the 12 links of dependent origination is a kind of more detailed description of the actual mechanism by which sentient beings are reborn within samsara. And then as they are born in samsara, then also describes the mechanism by which they experience different kinds of suffering, okay? And then, right, after we have this mind of, renunciation that then, wishes to achieve liberation from samsara, then, we have to then abandon the causes of samsara, right? Since the cause of samsara fundamentally are the afflictions, and the root of afflictions is this mind that grasps onto the true existence of phenomena, then we have to cultivate the direct antidote to that, this wisdom realizing, the emptiness or the non-existence of that kind of false sense of the self. Okay, so now when we talk about the three higher trainings, those are the higher training in morality, higher training in concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. So the higher training in wisdom is where the actual antidote to samsara is found. But, the other two, it's not just that we come to realize emptiness and then we're liberated, but we need to also meditate on that view of ultimate reality again and again. And we need to do so with a completely concentrated and powerful mind. And so you'll hear this phrase, right? The union of calm abiding and special insight, right? So special insight being the mind that realizes emptiness, but we also need to have this mind of calm abiding, or we can say perfect concentration. Then using that perfectly concentrated mind, focusing on emptiness, that then has the true power to, not just, we can say to abandon the ignorance grasping to true existence. Okay. And then to get this perfectly concentrated mind, we need the first higher training, that of ethical discipline. Well, yeah, a few reasons for this. One is, yeah, I mean, we've already talked about how then ethical discipline enables us to get a good rebirth in our future life. And since we probably won't attain liberation in this life, we need a string of these, good rebirths. But even then, on a more kind of practice-oriented level, right? Basically, to attain good ethical discipline, we have to be kind of mindful of what our body, what's going on in our mind, what we're about to say, what we're doing, right? So training in this way then helps us when we then go down to sit down to meditate. Then we have a kind of heightened sense of mindfulness and awareness. And so then when various distractions are about to appear in the mind, we can kind of nip them in the bud. And so this practice of concentrating and being mindful and aware of our conduct and what's going on in our mind then is a kind of conducive factor to generating concentration. Okay, and then we have the attitude of a person of great capacity. So those persons who are called superior, who sincerely want to extinguish all the sufferings of others by understanding their own suffering. So here again, by understanding their own suffering, this is already kind of showing that these, practices of a person of middle capacity is also done by the person of great capacity, right? As it says in the foundation of all the qualities, right? Just as I have fallen into the sea of samsara, so have all mother migratory beings. Please bless me to see this, train the supreme bodhicitta, and bear the responsibility of freeing migratory beings, right? So then we use, the understanding of our own suffering, okay? Have that as the foundation, and then we apply that to others. Just as I am experiencing suffering like this, actually, all others are doing, are experiencing the same thing. Okay, and they've been my mother, so I care that they're suffering. Okay, so now I have to do something to free them from that suffering, right? And this is the kind of essence of the, Mahayana path. So then understanding their own suffering, and then having this wish, recognizing that all beings are, near, dear, and lovable to us, then, wanting to extinguish the suffering of others, then this is the kind of attitude of a person of great capacity. Okay. So then the actual practices they undertake, bodhicitta, we mentioned generating this wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then, it's not just that they have the wish, but they then have to accumulate the causes that lead to enlightenment. And these are the 6 perfections we mentioned before: generosity, ethical discipline, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. So by doing that, one then accumulates these stores of merit and transcendental wisdom that then become the causes of attaining the so-called 2 bodies of the Buddha. But anyway, for now, we can just say those are the causes for enlightenment. Okay. All right, so that is the overview. And now we're going to break up into the discussion groups. And so first thing I wanted to have you then consider, this whole thing about practices shared with a person of great, of small capacity, right? So why do they talk about that? And why don't they just talk about the practices of a person of small capacity? What's the difference between the two? And then, as we saw, right, we don't have the shared with when we talk about the person of great capacity, right? And so why is that? So that's one thing I want you to discuss. And then if there's more time, any other questions that you have when you went through the reading, or if it was explained, or maybe not so well explained in a lecture, also first, ask in your discussion groups, and then we'll come back together, and any kind of outstanding questions we can then cover. So Can we have a breakout room for 15 minutes? Great.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Okay, so what did you guys think? Anyone want to share or have questions?
I don't think, are we all back? Yeah, we're all back. Okay.
Yeah, we're all back.
I have a question from the reading. Or
Okay,
do you want
great.
to first talk about your question?
You know, either way, yeah.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
the question is, if a person is of limited capacity or just learning the teachings, and they don't know better, why does the Dharma tell them accept or reject whatever you don't believe? Because they may reject something that they need to make progress. So it seems counterintuitive. Like if somebody doesn't know the path, but the teaching is like, just take what you believe and throw away anything else. It's perplexing.
Well, it doesn't say like that, right? So the quote from Sutra is, right, just like a goldsmith will only, you know, acquire the gold upon rubbing it, cutting it, and scorching it, so you too, monks and scholars, should adopt my teachings only after thorough analysis, not out of mere respect for me, right? So the point is, right, the person, when they see a kind of, you know, metallic yellowish stone, they don't just throw it away thinking, oh, it might be fake gold, but they test, they analyze and see if it's real or not, you know, and then when they have confidence, they take it on, right? So, you know, to say that, you know, it's not that the Buddha says, okay, just take what you believe, and those things you don't believe, yeah, just throw it away. He's saying, you know, take what I'm saying as a hypothesis, analyze it, right? Cut it, rub it, scorch it. This means, you know, there's a lot of work to be done to determine whether, you know, these teachings are valid, whether they are definitive, whether they're to be interpreted in another way, right? So it's just not like you know, don't believe what I say. It's rather, don't just accept my teachings out of merely believing me, but see for yourself. You see the difference?
So like pressure test it and analyze it. Okay.
Yes.
I was misinterpreting the way it was being framed, but okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question about the reading as well? So
please.
Okay, so why did when he was in India and they were trying to get him to go back to Nepal, why didn't he just say, I'm going to Nepal, instead of making up this story about, oh, I'm going on a pilgrimage and I'll be back? Why didn't he just say, I'm going back to Nepal?
I'm
like, why are you lying, basically?
So yeah, this is a good question, but basically, okay. One, so the thought is, right, since he had this kind of important position in the monastery, if he said, I'm going to leave, he might not get permission to do so, because they would then, you know, create obstacles and say, oh no, you can't leave, you're too important here, right? But he thought, okay, if I just say I'm going on pilgrimage for some time, it might be easier for them to swallow like this. So yeah, was that a lie? So this is the thing, right? Remember, with bodhicitta, right? The intention behind the action, you know, determines whether it's, you know, virtuous or non-virtuous, right? So, you know, even sometimes we see in the teachings that if it's for a greater purpose, then normally actions that would be non-virtuous can then become virtuous. So that's yeah.
Slippery slope. I'm not sure I'm buying. I don't know.
Agree with Namdrong. I don't necessarily agree fully 100% with you. If we had time, I would debate you on that.
Yeah.
I think you're going a little too far, just a touch. Overstatement.
Well,
Because
you
remember
debate with me and Atisha.
Killed the guy that was going to kill everybody on the ship and steal everything. Even that person with that foresight had a brief moments in the hell realms from the result of killing that person, even though he saved all the other beings on the ship. Remember?
Yes,
so
yes,
let's
yes.
not go too far with our.
Yes, this is, and you should be skeptical. You should raise an eyebrow about this. So these are kind of, in very extraordinary circumstances. But you could see, for example, okay, if it were the case that if he were honest, if Atisha went to the other people in the administration and they said, okay, I'm going to Tibet and I'm going to, teach them there. I'm never going to come back, right? And he knew they were going to then make a big obstacle and then prevent him from coming and say, no, you can't leave, right? Then he had to weigh, okay, what is the relative benefit from me staying in this monastery and living out the rest of my life here versus the benefit of going to Tibet and, teaching, reestablishing the Dharma there, right? And he was actually told by, he had a vision of Tara that said, you going to Tibet would be much greater benefit, for the teachings. And then, given all those circumstances, he was like, okay, well, since it's of greater benefit for me to do this, well, okay, what do I do? So, this is one of the difficulties in samsara, right? Where we are sometimes faced with very difficult decisions where there's not a kind of clear cut, totally non-problematic way of behaving. And sometimes we have to balance these competing objectives and do what we think is best. And so, of course, in hindsight, we see the tremendous benefit of Atisha going to Tibet had for, both the beings in Tibet and then now even today, all of us who are now, inherited the lineage of teachings that came from him. So of course, it is a very slippery slope. So if in that situation, he could have, still gone to Tibet and gotten permission by being completely clean and honest and saying, this is what I'm doing, guys. And maybe say, hey, don't argue with me. Tara told me herself, that would be better, right? So we should be very reluctant, to lie or to kill or do all these things. But you asked me why Atisha did it. And so that is, filling out the context of that.
So I have a question about that.
Hmm.
Did Atisha have any idea at the time when he was going to Tibet in order to do what he, wanted to do, spreading the teachings there, that he wouldn't come back? Did he know he wasn't coming back? That would be there's some things that we don't know that we're making assumptions about.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to know what other people knew or didn't know. What is described in the text is at one point, he did try to come back to India, and there had been a war that broke out. So then, instead he, at that point he had already composed this lamp for the path to enlightenment, right? And they did try to come back, and they were close to the Nepal border, and there had been a war that broke out. So instead of sort of risking, going through the war zone, then they sent a letter instead, and they sent a copy of the text back to the monastery saying, hey, look, there's this war. I'm just gonna, stay here and not come back for the time being. And it is said that the people in Vikramalashila, the monastery, after reading the text, they're like, oh wow, that's really great what he's doing there. And then they sort of weren't as insistent of him coming back. But whether he had the kind of clairvoyance that could see that the war was going to break out and do all these things, that I can't really say. Tara did make the prediction that he would die in Tibet. So yeah, I don't know then what Atisha was thinking, but in his actions, he did make the effort to try to come back. Okay, good questions. Thank you for that. But man, now our time is up. And then my questions then kind of fell by the wayside. So can anyone just give a little answer about that, this difference between the path shared and the path of small capacity or whatever?
Eve, do you want to unmute?
Okay, I didn't understand this at first, so my breakout group helped me. So the idea is that there are these three scopes or three levels of capacity, but they're not mutually exclusive. So the highest scope incorporates the lowest two, the middle scope incorporates the lowest scope, and the lowest scope stands by itself. So that would be my way of explaining that. But they, like, when you go to the higher scope, you don't go, oh, I don't need the other stuff. It's all inclusive.
Okay, so a follow-up question to that then would be, all right, we talk about the practices shared with someone of the middle scope. Is there a practice just of someone of the middle scope? Or if something is a practice shared with someone in the middle scope, is it necessarily a practice of the middle scope or you understand?
Yeah, you want me to give an answer to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll give an example from the practice of a person of medium capacity would be to meditate on the faults of samsara.
Okay.
Okay, so that's something that would be shared with somebody of the medium scope and the higher scope, but it wouldn't necessarily be a focus of somebody of small capacity. But if I look at the practice of a person of small capacity meditating on impermanence and death, all the scopes would do that. Does that answer what you were asking?
Well, what you said, it was well said, and it was true. So that's good. But I'm now wondering if we have two people. Okay, so first of all, the meditation on the faults of samsara, then do we say that that's a practice of the medium scope? Do we say it's a practice of the shared with the medium scope? Or can it be either? Is it both? So this practice, meditating on the faults of samsara, how then do we categorize it? Or do we need more kind of information?
Not sure what you're asking.
Wouldn't it be shared to get a person to go from the small scope to the medium scope?
Okay, I saw Mary Ellen raise her hand.
Oh.
I would say that it's a medium scope practice because of the motivation for it is not there in the small scope, so it's not shared. But if you were in the great scope, then it would be shared.
Okay. Maybe I'm not asking the question kind of properly. Anyway, we're a little bit out of time, so I'll have you guys think about this more, but I'll just kind of give you the answer a bit, right? So the point is, okay, when we talk about the practice of, you know, meditating on the faults of samsara, when a person, you know, a true practitioner of the great scope, a bodhisattva, is doing that, right? When a bodhisattva meditates on the faults of samsara, their motivation is to, you know, attain complete enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So their meditation on the faults of samsara is a practice shared with a person of the medium scope. When a person who is interested in just gaining individual liberation for themselves, when they meditate on the faults of samsara, that practice is a fully fledged practice of a person of medium capacity, right? Because their motivation is to attain liberation from samsara, okay? So since this Lamrim is, you know, written for people who are eventually, you know, going to go into the full-fledged great scope, there's this presentation of, you know, paths shared with, you know, small capacity and medium capacity. You understand? So to give another example, when a bodhisattva abandons non-virtue, right? That the practice of abandoning non-virtue, okay, is a practice that a bodhisattva shares with a person of small capacity. Okay, a person who's only interested in getting a good rebirth in the next life, when they abandon non-virtue, that's a fully fledged, you know, practice of a person of small capacity. But a bodhisattva doing it, it's a path, it's a practice they share with the person who's only interested in getting a good rebirth. The bodhisattva isn't only interested in getting a good rebirth. They have a you know, bigger goal in mind, but that practice of abandoning non-virtue is something they do in common with a person who is only you know, interested in a good rebirth. You understand? So that's what's, you know, shared and not shared. So then the flip side would be, can we identify something that would be a practice of a person of medium scope that is not shared? So this is a question I want you to think about, right? We have all these other ones that are shared. Is there anything that's then not shared? And I'll let you guys chew on that over the next week. Okay, so we are a little bit over time. It's okay. So maybe, unless there's something super pressing right now, maybe we can, oops. We can
what is the
end it.
homework for next week?
Yes. Okay, we'll send out an email maybe tonight or tomorrow with that. Yeah. Let me have a think. So yeah, that'll come in the email. And thank you. If you've done the first 3 days of liberation in the palm of your hand, that's the entire you know, main kind of reading, liberation in the palm of your hand. And so yeah, like that. For now, the only homework you have is to think about that question I just asked. And yeah, it's good. Okay. Anything else? All right, so let us do a brief dedication now at the end of the teachings, right? So here, may whatever virtue I've collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and may it especially cause the essence of perfect pure Losang Drakpa's teachings to shine forever. Okay, so thank you very much for all of your efforts. And we will see you next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Be
Thank
well.
you.
Take care.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Marianne.
Venerable.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.